Yeah.
Okay. This week is Parshas Noach. I mean, it's just Parshas Vayechi. I'm sorry, Parshas Vayechi, and also this week to this Tuesday is Asara b'Teves. Asara b'Teves is one of the 4 fast days that are associated with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, and with the Jewish people going into Golus. It's mentioned in the pasuk of Zechariah, in Zechariah. Tzom HaRavi, the fast of the 4th month, which is Tammuz. Usually it falls out in July. It's the fast of the 4th month. What happened was that's when the Babylonians and later on the Romans broke into the perimeter of Jerusalem. They broke through the walls of Jerusalem. That's when they broke through the walls of Jerusalem. But Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, where the months in Tanakh are counted from Nisan. So the fast of the 5th month, that is the Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And of course, the 9th of Av, that was when the Beis Hamikdash was set on fire and was destroyed, the temple, both in the first Commonwealth and in the second Commonwealth. Tzom HaSiri, Tzom HaShvi, the fast of the 7th month, that's Tzom Gedalia, because even after the Babylonians sent the Jews into exile, even after they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, they allowed for some form of Jewish government in Eretz Yisrael. And Gedalia was sort of the Jewish governor there. And Gedalia was assassinated. And as a result of the assassination of Gedalia, so many tragedies took place to the Jewish people. And Tzom HaAsiri, that's Teves, that's this month. Asara b'Teves, the 10th of Teves, that's when the Babylonians surrounded the city of Jerusalem. And then to a certain degree, the siege began. And it's very interesting. The halacha is that if any of these 4 fast days fall out on Shabbos, the fast day is postponed to Sunday. So let's say if Tisha B'Av is seemingly the most stringent of the fast days, but if it falls out in Shabbos, it's postponed on Sunday. The only fast that we do on Shabbos is Yom Kippur. But any one of the 4 fast days that commemorate the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash are not observed on Shabbos, and they're postponed till Sunday. So, but the Avudram, the David Avudram, he says that according to the calendar, the way we have it, Asara b'Teves, the fast of Teves, which commemorates the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, which can never fall out according to the calendar on Shabbos. It does fall out on Fridays, but it cannot fall out on Shabbos. But before the calendar was put into use, when the new month was declared on the basis of the sighting of the new moon. So then it was possible for Asara b'Teves to fall out on Shabbos. So he says if Asara b'Teves would fall out on Shabbos, so we would have to fast on Shabbos. And it's very strange I would say of the 4 fast days, the most stringent of them is Tisha B'Av. We know Tisha B'Av, besides fasting, and the fast begins at night, and there are many additional forms of mourning. So Tisha B'Av is more stringent than all the other fast days. But if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, it's postponed to Sunday. But Asara B'Teves, which is probably of the 4 fast days the one that is least observed, if it should fall out, if in the situations where it could fall out on Shabbos, which does not happen today, so we would have to fast on Shabbos. Why is that? So because the pasuk in Yecheskel says, "Ksov lecha es hayom hazeh es etzem hayom hazeh." Write down for you this day, the day when the siege of Jerusalem began. Be'etzem hayom hazeh, in the essence of this day, and the essence of this day, etzem hayom hazeh, is mentioned in regard to Yom Kippur also. It's mentioned in regard to Yom Kippur also. And we know that Yom Kippur, if it falls out on Shabbos, we still fast on Shabbos. So he says what is true about Yom Kippur is true about Asara B'Teves. And that seems very, very strange. What's this? Apparently, according to the Avudra, most disagree with him, or the Beis Yosef anyway thinks that they disagree with him. The Asara B'Teves, Asara B'Teves, if it falls out on Shabbos, so we have to fast. So apparently, there's a certain similarity, a relationship between Asara B'Teves and Yom Kippur. And the question is, what is that relationship? Now, in this week's Sedra, in this week's Sedra, the pasuk tells us, the Torah tells us that Yosef, before Yaakov passed away, brought his 2 sons to Yaakov for a special bracha, for a special blessing. And as Yaakov is about to give them the blessing, Yosef brings them close to Yaakov, to Jacob, and Jacob says, "Mi'eleh." He, according to the simple reading of the Torah at that point, Jacob was his vision was somewhat impaired. He was getting elderly. So he wasn't able to be sure who it was in front of him. But our sages say that even though he was prepared and ready to give the sons of Yosef a special blessing, a special bracha, but all of a sudden the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit that was necessary for the blessing that Yaakov possessed, left him. And it left him because he understood at that moment, through heaven, he understood that they will have descendants who will be kings over Israel and will lead the Jewish people into idolatry. And because of that, he asked the question, Mi'eleh, who are these who are not deserving of the blessing? And the question is, just because years and years later, his descendants are going to lead the Jewish people into idolatry when they become kings of Israel. This is after there is a split between Judah and Israel, and two separate nations are formed. So because of that, the sons of Yosef should not receive a blessing. And then the Torah says, so we have to understand, why is it that at a certain point, Jacob thought maybe they're not deserving of a blessing? And then when the Torah tells us that when he made this exclamation, Mi'ela, who are these, according to Medrash, who are not deserving of a blessing? So Yosef retorted. He says, Vayomer Yosef, Bonaihem, they're my sons. Asher nasan li Elokim bazeh, that God gave me. Bazeh could mean here in Egypt. They were born in Egypt. Or the Medrash says bazeh also means that Yaakov took out two contracts. One was a shtar erison, a marriage contract. Today, a marriage is done by giving the kala something. The custom is that they give, but it has to be something that has a certain worth. So today, the custom is they give a ring. But there's another way, not practiced today, to perform a religious marriage, and that is through a contract, through a shtar. And Yosef, apparently, when he married Asnas, who was his wife, he used the shtar, the marriage contract form of marriage. It could be the reason is because you need witnesses for a regular marriage. And according to some opinions, I think the Rashba, when the marriage contract is written by the groom, Yosef being the groom in this case, then it's valid even if there are no signatures of witnesses. Could be in Egypt, it was difficult to obtain witnesses that are kosher. But in addition, the Medrash says, and I don't know that the Medrash has to be taken literally, but we have to understand the idea behind the Medrash. And in addition to showing Yaakov the marriage contract, the shtar erison, he also showed him the ksuva. And as a result of that, Yaakov felt that the children that were born in this marriage were deserving of a bracha, of a blessing. And the question is, what was the fact that Yaakov was married when he had his sons, Efrayim and Menashe, relevant to the problem that their descendants will be kings who will lead the Jewish people into idolatry? How did that alleviate that problem? Now, we take a look at the bracha, at the blessing that Yaakov gave the sons of Yosef, Efrayim and Menashe. So part of the bracha is B'cha Yevarech Yisrael Leimor. Through you, the Jewish people will give a blessing. Yisimcha Elokim ke'Efrayim and Menashe. You should be like Efrayim and Menashe. In other words, when a Jewish person gives a blessing, specifically if a father or a parent gives a blessing to his children, he says that you should be like Efrayim and Menashe. The custom today is that when you give a blessing to daughters or to ladies or to girls, you say, Yisimcha Elokim, Kisara, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. But in the Torah, it is Efrayim and Menashe who are set up as the symbol of blessing. And there is one other biblical figure that is also set up as a symbol of blessing. And that is Abraham, Avram Avinu. When the God gave the command to Abraham to leave Haran and to go to the land that will show him Teretz Yisrael, Teretz Canaan, he says, "Vayechi bracha," and you shall be a blessing. And the commentaries explain on the basis of the Medrash, Vayechi bracha, that you will be a symbol of blessing. When a father wants to bless his son, he'll say, you should be like Abraham. You should be like Avraham Avinu. So, in other words, both Abraham on one hand and Efrayim and Menashe, the sons of Joseph, on the other hand, they are both set up as the symbol of blessing. Apparently, there is something similar to them as biblical figures that both Efrayim and Menashe on one hand, and the sons of Joseph, and Avraham, Abraham on the other hand, are set up as the symbols of blessing. And my father explained that there was a special reason why the sons of Joseph and Abraham were set up as the symbols of blessing. Because Echad Haya Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was all alone. Avram Avinu did not come from an environment of devotion to God. He came from an environment that not only was idolatrous, but also to a large degree was immoral. And nevertheless, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, was singled out as the father of the Jewish people, as the advocate of monotheism, the first advocate of monotheism. And Yosef's sons, where were they brought up? They were brought up in Egypt. Egypt was the symbol of immorality. It was a place that religion was, the religious observance manifests itself in devotion to idolatry. So it's true, it was the house of Yosef, but to a certain degree, after Yosef came to Egypt, he also was all alone. To Abraham's house, after he went to Eretz Canaan, there was this Hanefesh Asharasu B'chara, and Abraham created in Eretz Canaan a community. But the environment, if I could use this, the environment of the community was something that Efrayim and Menashe was able to overcome. And even Yosef's house. Yosef was an assistant to the king, an associate king of Paro. Undoubtedly, people of the royal court, people of influence, the religious leaders of that time had to have contact with Yosef. And Efrayim and Menashe were able to overcome that influence. So they too were set up as the symbol of bracha, as the symbol of blessing, just as Avram, who also stood alone, was set up as the symbol of blessing. And this is the answer I heard from my father. Now, and my father would mention, Sadik HaTamar Yifrach, where does a tamar grow? A tamar grows in the desert. It's a tree of the desert. Who is the real tzaddik? The real righteous person? Not one who is righteous in an environment that almost necessitates him to be righteous. But the real test of righteousness is how a person acts when he's in a spiritual desert. Tzaddik HaTamar Yifrach, Avram and Efrayim and Menashe, from their youth, they were like the tamar. And I've mentioned many times, the explanation with the time of Matan Torah, at the time that the Jewish people accepted the Torah, our sages tell us that God held the mountain over the heads of the Jewish people, and he said, "In tekablu es Torah mutav, v'im lav sham tehek v'raschem." If you accept the Torah, it'll be good. But if not, there will be a burial. And my father mentioned, I think, I might be wrong, but I think my father mentioned the name of the Meshech Chachma, of Reb Meir Simcha. That the question is, figuratively, again, whether it has to be taken literally or it's the idea behind it, God raised the mountains over the head of the Jewish people and said, if you don't accept the Torah, sham tehek v'raschem, there will be your burial. And the question is, he should have said, Paul, here will be your burial. And the answer is, the Jewish people at that time were certainly committed at the time of Matan Torah, after seeing all the miracles of the Asara Samakos, of the man, of Kriyas Yamsuf, of the splitting of the sea. There was no doubt about their commitment. But commitment, the true commitment, is not just the commitment that's given under miraculous circumstances, where there's almost a psychological compulsion to accept. But true commitment is in other circumstances where you don't have that psychological compulsion. More so, where if anything, there is a psychological compulsion to the reverse, and you overcome that psychological compulsion. This was what the Sham Tehek V'Raschem. You should know that the commitment to Torah and mitzvos is not within a certain given milieu, a certain situation. The commitment to Torah and mitzvos is irregardless of the situation. And if in a different situation, you're going to reject Torah and mitzvos, if a given situation, you will assimilate yourself, then sham tehek firaschem, there will be your downfall. But why was this mentioned at the time of Matan Torah? In other words, when we accept at the very beginning, it is necessary, at the very outset, one has to show, not just show, has to feel commitment that irregardless of what the circumstances will be, in a sense, you have to seize the moment at the very beginning and commit yourself to Torah and mitzvos, irregardless of the changing circumstances. And I've mentioned many times the Meraglim, the spies that were sent by Moshe Rabbeinu and then came and led a rebellion against God and against Moshe. So these spies, when they left, Anashim Tzadikim, they were righteous people. And they were leaders of the Jewish people. And nevertheless, after 40 days being away from the Jewish people, of being in a foreign environment, in a different situation, they changed completely. What did it show? It showed that their commitment was not a commitment that would have application in changing circumstances. And when we deal with environment, so one of the most important elements in protecting us from the negative influences of the environment, of the outside environment, and the outside environment was something that we constantly have to be on guard for, even under the best of circumstances, but certainly when we are in a country that's not ours, certainly where we're in a situation where there is changing lifestyles, we have to be on guard that the natural flow of the environment, that we not be carried by the natural flow of the environment. And the protection we have is the Jewish home. Even at the time the Jewish people left Egypt. And what was the purpose? The Jewish people leaving Egypt, in a sense, the whole Egyptian experience was one of preparing the Jewish people for the exiles that they will be throughout Jewish history. And just before they leave, when they have the Passover sacrifice, what are they told? Al yetze ish mimkomo, al mibeso. They weren't allowed that night of Passover to leave their house. It was to emphasize that, to a certain degree, the importance of the house. How do we overcome, to whatever degree we're able, the influence of Egypt? By the Jewish home in Egypt. And our sages tell us that, to a large degree, the perpetuation and the continuation of the Jewish people was due to the efforts of the Jewish woman in Egypt, who in a sense created a home environment. And this was the reason that Yaakov was so concerned about Efrayim and Menashe. Well, this is one of the reasons, I should say, that he was concerned about Efrayim and Menashe, seeing that their descendants, generations down the road, are going to lead the Jewish people into idolatry. Because sometimes a person could certainly outwardly and even inwardly be very religious, committed, but there are certain feelings, certain emotions, that if it's in a different environment, will have a different impact. And if it's not an environment that they encounter, that they're used to, it might come out in a different environment, in a different situation. And so Yaakov was scared that perhaps it's because of Menashe and Ephraim, because of something that's hidden in the recesses of their mind and in their soul. But somehow they were able to overcome it in Egypt. But when someone else has it, future generations have it, they will, as a result of this inheritance of certain hidden attitudes, so maybe they're not deserving of bracha. And this is especially true about Efrayim and Menashe. Why? Efrayim and Menashe, that's Yosef. As a matter of fact, there's the Torah tells us that Efrayim and Menashe, when they received their blessing, because Yaakov wanted to place his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on the head of Menashe, so I don't want to use the word, he put his hands one across the other. And the question is, why did he do that? My father asked the question. Why did he have them stay where they were? Why didn't he just have them change places? And my father suggested that Efrayim and Menashe, they were brothers, and each one had strengths. So in a sense, he crossed his hands to be symbolic of the fact that each one should benefit from the strength of the other. Matter of fact, we could, using that same logic, we could say at the end of this week's Sedra, when Yaakov blesses his sons, and he gives each one a separate blessing, except Shimon and Levi, they're told about their future together. And when he talks about the future of all the sons, he calls them all together. He says, Heyosvu, gather together, his chabru, become a unit, one unit. And then he talks to each one individually. Why was it important to have each one, everyone there, and to form a group? But the answer is the destiny of one Jew affects another Jew. If there is anti-Semitism in one area, be on guard. We have to understand what happens to one has an effect and an impact in the situation of the other. And perhaps Perhaps sometimes we were not always on guard about this. Perhaps we just looked at our own situation. So but I think there's another reason why Yaakov, in a sense, crossed his hands, because there are two approaches we can understand. In other words, Yosef became two shvatim. One was the tribe of Efrayim. The other was the tribe of Menashe. So was it a tribe of Efrayim and the other of tribe of Menashe? Or was it tribe Yosef 1, tribe Yosef 2? Now the Torah tells us that Yaakov told Yosef that any additional children that he would have, they would become members of the Shavits of their brothers. And the question is, Yosef had no other children. Why was it significant for the Torah to mention that Yaakov said, if you'll have other children, they will become members of the tribes of your brothers? How they'll divide it up, but that's a question. But why was it not important? Why was it important for Yaakov to say it? Why was it important? And even if Yaakov didn't know, why was it important for the Torah to mention it? But that's to emphasize that it wasn't Shevet Ephraim and Shevet Menashe, the tribe of Menashe and the tribe of Ephraim. It was the tribe of Yosef 1 and the tribe of Yosef 2. So this was the tribe of Yosef. So now Yosef was the son of Rachel. And in this week's Sedra, in a sense, I wouldn't call it an apologetic tone, but the way Rashi explains it, Yaakov realized that Yosef had feelings, was upset. Perhaps he hid it in the inner recesses of his mind. But when his mother Rachel died, Baderech, on the road, instead of taking her to the Maras HaMachpelah, where the other Emos are buried, he buried her by the road. He didn't even take her to the nearest city. So Yaakov wanted to excuse himself to Yosef, to explain to Yosef. Now that he was asking Yosef to take his body and bring it to Eretz Yisrael and bury him in the Maras Machpelah. He says, Al pi hadibur asisi kain. I did so because I was instructed to by God, by heaven. Because in the future, when the Jewish people will go out to exile, they will stop down the road at the grave of Rachel. And then Rachel, the soul of Rachel, will cry out to God. And God will tell her, Rachel, don't cry. You have a reward. The children will return. Now, what's the idea behind all this? Being on the road, and what's the idea behind it? But Yaakov is different than the other of us. Yitzchak never left Eretz Yisrael. Abraham did leave Eretz Yisrael, but from the time his name was changed from Avram to Avraham, from the point that he became a father of the Jewish people, he never left Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov, perhaps at the time of Lavan, when he was with Lavan, he was not yet a father. He was destined to be a father of the Jewish people. But when does he become a father of the Jewish people? When he gets the name Yisrael. And Targum points Rav Raya, the word Sarisa has the word Sar, an officer. Yaakov becomes an officer of the Jewish people. It means he becomes the father of the Jewish people at that point. From the time that Yaakov Avinu becomes a father of the Jewish people, so he's the only one that leaves Eretz Yisrael. He goes down to Egypt. So Yaakov, on one hand, Abraham and Yitzchak are the fathers of the Jewish people everywhere. Because to a certain degree, there's a certain association that the Jews of Chutz La'aretz have with Eretz Yisrael. But as one unit, Yaakov, on one hand, is the father of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. He lived many years in Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, he's the father of the Jewish people in Golus, in exile. Because even as a father of the Jewish people, he was in exile. I think his two wives, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is the mother of the Jewish people of exile, the Jewish people of Golus. She dies just after she comes into Eretz Yisrael. And she's buried by the road that the Jewish people are going to take into exile, leaving Eretz Yisrael. So, and whereas Leah is buried the Maras HaMachpelah in Eretz Yisrael. She lives in Eretz Yisrael. She dies in Eretz Yisrael, and she dies and is buried together in the family lot, so to say. So Rachel is the mother of the Jews of Chutz La'aretz of exile. So in a sense, Rachel and the children of Rachel represent Golus, the survival of the Jewish people in Golus, in exile. So there was a concern that they should not be influenced, because they are the symbol of blessing for future generations. They should not be influenced by the general environment of exile, of Egypt. And there were many Egypts throughout Jewish history. So because of this, Yaakov was concerned, maybe they cannot be the symbol of blessing. But it could be understood even more so. Now, regarding the mitzvah of Pirya Verivia, there's a mitzvah of having children. Now, the Rambam, there seems to be a dispute between the Rambam and the Rush. It might not be a dispute, or not such a major dispute. There's all kinds of opinions in the Rush. I'll limit myself to the Rambam today, though. The Rambam says that a person should marry a woman. At the beginning of Hilchos Ishus in the Koseres, he said, Lisa Isha B'ksuva Dushin, to marry a woman with a ksuva and with dushin. Dushin is the giving over of the ring. Ksuva, what is a ksuva? Ksuva is a contract that also, dushin could also be a marriage contract, but ksuva is more than just a marriage contract. A ksuva is where the husband obligates himself to take care of the wife, and in a sense, to take care of the marriage. And if he should divorce the wife, he has certain financial liabilities towards the wife. Why was it? Not so much to give her the money, but to serve as a protection for the marriage. In other words, there should be a certain sense of security in marriage. And if the husband knows that he'll have a special obligations afterwards. He won't be so quick to divorce his wife. So the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Ishus in the Koseris, he lists the mitzvos there. So one is to marry a woman with a ksuva and with dushan. And then he says, lifros v'lirbos mimena, to have children through her. So it seemed the Rambam's opinion is that certainly the full mitzvah of Pirya Verivia. I'm not saying whether it be a partial kiyum or not, that's a separate story. But to have the full mitzvah of having children, the children have to be born inside a marriage relationship. But let's say somebody will have children outside a marriage relationship. According to the Rambam, he would not fulfill the mitzvah Pirya Verivia of having children. The Rosh, some say, disagrees. But so the Rambam says, now what's the idea behind it? Now the idea behind it is, I think, that the children were brought up, have to be brought up within a relationship. Because if they're not brought up within a relationship, then they become, I'll use my father's expression, like wild grass. They have to be part of a home. And home life, it's not only important that the parents should be married, but the marriage has to have a stable relationship. The ksuva contributes to the stability and the security of the marriage. And when there is no security in the relationship, so it's not a real relationship. It's bad for the couple, and it's even worse for the children that are brought up in that relationship. So I think this was the idea that Yosef was trying to tell Yaakov. Now, what was the bracha? What was the blessing that Yaakov gave the sons of Yosef? The Yidgu Larov B'Kerev Haaretz, that they should proliferate in the midst of the land. In other words, it was a bracha of becoming many throughout the generations. It was a bracha Pirya Verivia. Very often when the Torah talks about having children, the Torah uses the word Kel Shakai. So here it's a bracha Pirya Verivia, a bracha of having many descendants. So when Yaakov was scared that maybe Yosef's children, after all, Yosef was the minister to the king, he was the assistant king, he was the Mishnah Lamelech. Maybe his children were not brought up in the home. Maybe they were brought up in the high society of Egypt. So that's why Yosef took, and he said, no, they were brought up in a home. They were brought up in a home that had security. And now, the Pirya Verivia, having children, so is both. It's a mitzvah, and it was a blessing that God gave to Adam and to Noach. It was both a mitzvah, commandment, and it was a blessing. We could suggest that the blessing the blessing to a certain degree is like the mitzvah also. Just as the mitzvah, according to the Rambam, is to have children within a marriage relationship, a secure marriage relationship, so too the bracha is to have children within a secure marriage relationship. Yaakov Avinu thought, how could I appoint them as the symbols of bracha, blessing, that everybody would say, use them as a symbol and say, V'yidgu l'rov b'kerev haaretz, when they themselves were brought up in a situation that might have been brought up in a situation that there wasn't a real home life. So because of that, Yaakov took out the Shtar Ersin, the marriage contract, and he took off the ksuva. And he said, no, they were brought up in a home of security, a home of devotion to them, and devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, devotion to God. And it's because of that that Yaakov realized at that point, the Ruach Kodesh returned, and he gave them the bracha. But the point was, what do we see from this? We see from this, it's not just important. When marriage first takes place, you have to set the foundation for the home. You can't set the you can't rely on setting the foundation at the bris or later on. You have to try to set the foundation at the very, very beginning. Just like by Matan Torah, Sham tehek furaschem, but the commitment of under all circumstances had to be then, right at the beginning, because it's very, very difficult to change later on. And I think perhaps we could understand with this the about Asara b'teves. The question I raised is, why should Asara b'teves be different than the other fast days? The other fast days, if they fall out in Shabbos, are postponed to Sunday. But Asar b'teves, according to Avudram, we don't have that problem, because according to the calendar that we use today, Asar b'teves never falls out on Shabbos. But according to the Avudram, when the new month was declared on the basis of the sighting of the moon,
Asar b'teves can.
It can
On Erev Shabbos.
Erev Shabbos, but it can't fall out in Shabbos. Can't fall out in Shabbos. I said Erev Shabbos. Cannot fall out on Shabbos today, but in the old days, when the declaration of the new month was based on the sighting of the moon, Asar b'teves was able to fall out on Shabbos. So Asar b'teves is different than Tisha B'Av, different than Shabbos b'Tammuz, different than Tzom Gedalia, in that you would have had to fast on Shabbos itself. And the question is, why should Asar b'teves be more stringent than Tisha B'Av? And what does it have similar to Yom Kippur that has the same halacha? But the answer is, when we look at the 4 fast days, the 4 fast days have a double element in them. On one hand, they are a certain degree of mourning. It might depend on the circumstances, but there's a certain degree of mourning associated with them. We're mourning the exile. We're mourning the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Tisha B'Av, it's obvious, but even the other fast days, under certain circumstances, according to the Ramban, all the stringencies of Tisha B'Av could apply to other fast days also, when there's lots of trouble for the Jewish people. But even besides that, that according to many opinions, the fasting could also be a form of mourning. So it's mourning, but more than mourning, the other fast days are tzedakah, crying out to God for help. And it has this double element, these 4 fast days. On one hand, we're mourning. We're mourning the state of the Jewish people now. We're mourning the destruction of the temple. We're mourning exile. But even more than that, it's tzedakah, it's crying out to God. Please, God, help us. Return us to the temple. Return us to the land of Israel. But when did and Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is not a day of mourning. On the contrary, Yom Kippur is a holiday. It's a fast day, but it's perhaps the most significant holiday. It's the day that God forgives us for our sins. We dress up on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is not a day of mourning at all. Yom Kippur is a day of tzedakah. It's a day of crying out to God for help. So the vidui and all this, we say, forgive us, forgive us, forgive us. Make our lot a good lot. Inscribe us in the book of life. Now, of the 4 fast days that commemorate the Churban, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the Jewish people going to exile, which one is most identified with tzedakah, with crying out to God, as opposed to Avelis, as opposed to mourning? The very first one. What does Asara B'Teves commemorate? Asara B'Teves commemorates the beginning of the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Afterwards, they broke through the walls. Afterwards, they destroyed the temple. But we have to know, when we deal in Golus, we have to know, especially in Golus, but in everything, we have to seize the moment, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think that's the idea behind Asara B'Teves, because by Asara B'Teves, if the Jewish people, by Asara B'Teves, when the siege begins, when we're in trouble, it's not just for Asara B'Teves. Asara B'Teves tells us about all other difficult situations that we encounter. Sometimes when we're in trouble, and if we postpone, it'll be too late to cry out to God. We should never postpone. We generally say, Zrizim makdimin lemitzvos. You have to be quick in doing mitzvahs. Don't postpone the mitzvahs. Mitzvah haba liot chal tach mitzena. Do not postpone doing the mitzvah. But especially when it comes to tzedakah, to crying out to God because of a trouble, you don't postpone, because you don't know if you'll have the opportunity later. That we have to, at the very beginning, just as, because what happens in the very beginning, first of all, what happens in the very beginning affects our perspective later on. We see people who made mistakes, and we all made mistakes when the COVID started, and understanding what was going on. But then we saw people dying, Rosh Hashivas, parents, relatives, children. And some people just are in denial. Why? Because one of the hardest things for a person to say is, I made a mistake. That's one of the hardest things possible. So when we don't take the right attitude right at the beginning, we're more likely to continue to make a mistake. When we think there's a crisis and we say, well, it's not so bad yet, And perhaps during World War II, many people in Europe made that same mistake. But they kept postponing until it was too late. That's the lesson of the Avudram's opinion of Asara B'Teves. We have to seize the moment at the very beginning. One hand, we seize the moment because it might be too late later. On the other hand, we have to seize the moment because we have an attitude that will try to justify and rationalize our original attitude. This is the lesson of Asara B'Teves. We have to seize the moment as soon as we can.
Okay, before we take questions, there's a very strong possibility that next week share will have to be an hour earlier from 10 to 11 Chicago time. So look out for your emails to see what time share will be next Sunday. Okay, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. Okay, no questions yet. So it's some clarification. So what's the connection again between the fast and Vayechi?
I think both emphasize I'm not saying that in here the fast emphasizes the point that to seize the moment and the impact that the beginning has later on. And here was the question that by Yosef's sons were tzaddikim, but because they were going to have descendants that would lead the Jewish people into idolatry, so Yaakov had a concern, maybe there is something in the recesses of their mind that will have an impact on later generations. In other words, we have to understand how the present has an impact on the future. You have to seize the moment right now.
Okay, there aren't any other questions, so I guess we'll